All right, and we will be posting the recording of this panel and all of the other ones happening at this time after the presentations. Also, thank you, as always, to our sponsors who are College Bridge. They basically made all of this possible, especially this format for everybody. So you are here in the last half of this session in a panel on reassessments. There are other ones happening in parallel. If you would like to jump over to those, they will also be recorded. There will be a short 15-minute break after this, and then a final town hall question and answer and wrap-up session. All right, so with that, I'm going to stop my screen share and turn this over to Matt. And Matt will begin telling us about his use of reassessments.
All right, is that doing the right thing?
Perfect.
Full screen, okay, good. I haven't done Google Slides on this before, so great. So hi, my name is Matt Charnley. I am an assistant teaching professor at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. I'm in the math department, and there's my email there. I just finished up my second year there teaching full-time. I did my PhD there as well, so they know me more, which is why I can get away with doing all these fancy things in my classes. So a little bit about, Rutgers and what it is, so just to get a better idea of the background here. So Rutgers has basically 3 separate universities. They're all Rutgers University, but they're different sort of campuses. One in New Brunswick, one in Newark, and one in Camden. The New Brunswick campus, which is where I am, has about 37,000 undergraduates. There are 4 different units to groups of buildings, basically different campuses at New Brunswick. So things are scattered quite a bit. The math department has around 80 tenure track faculty and 24 non-tenure track. I'm in that second group. And a lot of the course in the department, along with having a math major, is running service courses for the science and engineering majors at Rutgers because they are very big majors there. So here we have the Hill Center, which is where the math department is. It's where I used to spend all of my time. And then Rutgers just celebrated its 250th anniversary of its founding 5 years ago, and they celebrated that for about 3 years, and that was the sign they had for all of that fancy stuff. So what did I do this for? So the course I did this for was differential equations. This is our Math 244. It's a second year course, serving almost entirely engineering students. And basically they're taking this course as some of them, it's their last math class, and they have one more class beyond this that they will take in the math department before they're just taking only engineering classes. The setup is that each section has 2 lecture periods that are 80 minutes each, and 1 recitation each week that's with the TA that also runs for 80 minutes. Like last semester, my lectures were on Monday and Wednesday with the recitations on Thursdays. The lectures were around 80 students each, so I had a group of 80 students for this master-based system that I was doing, and the recitations divide those up into 3 sections for smaller group work kind of things. In terms of the scope of this course, it runs in about 5 sections in the fall, in terms of 5 lectures, and then 9 of them in the spring, just because that's on sequence for most engineering majors. So I have 80 students in each class of this. So obviously the reassessments portion of this can get sort of out of hand really quick. So the way I set this up reassessment was that they had their first pass was always on a weekly quiz. So every quiz they had a week that was in recitation graded by the TA. And those were assessed the objectives that had done the previous week. And then each midterm covered all the objectives that had been assessed so far in the course. So this means that the midterms grew as it went on. That's something that I'm considering if I want to keep or change future semesters, but that's the way I had set it up this time around. This is my first time running this course in a fully mastery-based or standards-based grading sort of format. So there's definitely things that I'll probably tweak in the future. And the finals and everything, the entire course. And I didn't have any reassessment allowed besides that. But the point was, if they missed it on the quiz and on the midterm, they could then get it again on the next midterm or on the final exam. So they saw these questions coming up over and over and over again throughout the entire course. And that gave them the opportunities for reassessing their mastery objectives and sort of building to a body of work for the entire course. With this, only the highest grade stood. So if they got mastered at any point, that counted them as having mastered the objective for a quiz or a test or an exam throughout the board, just based on wherever they had achieved that mastery. And yeah, so then that is basically my setup. And then we'll just come back around to questions once everyone gets their intro through.
Great, thank you very much. And just a reminder for everybody, if you have questions, you can enter them in the Q&A panel at any time, and we will come back around and ask panelists as that is appropriate. So thank you, Matt. Next is Kim, and if you can share your screen.
Sure. All right. Do you see my name?
Looks good. Yep.
Great. Okay. I'm Kim Fritz. I am a assistant lecturer at University of Wyoming. I teach civil and architectural engineering. So freshman and sophomore level classes such as statics. And yeah, statics is the class I'm going to be talking to you about today. So this is it's 2000 level, but we give it to freshman students. And it's the first in the series of engineering science classes that they take. It's most frequently the class that students say made them decide whether or not to stay in engineering. So it's got traditionally a very high DFW rate. So the reason that I chose mastery grading this semester was we had a large group of students who had never been in a college class before in a physical space, right? We needed to get creative with how we were connecting with them. We used an open OER textbook. And really this year was a big experiment of what can we do and what is going to work. So if you think about a traditional engineering class, you know, it's homework, quizzes, and exams. I brought in a whole bunch of extra stuff. I called it the buffet of opportunities to give them a bunch of different ways to show that they were doing their learning. However, the bedrock of this course was homework. So that's what I will talk about today. I gave the students unlimited attempts on their homework. And the reason being, I want them to keep doing it until they get it right, okay? I should note this was manual. This was not using Mastering Engineering or any sort of textbook manufacturer website with auto grading. This was all by hand. So I had a team of 3 amazing graders who did not know what they were getting into, and I would be sort of the peaker coming in when my own graders had their own tests, you know, busy weeks. I would come in and help them out. So we had 80 homework problems, which scaled over the course of 50 weeks, was just the same as a traditionally graded class, you know, 6 to 9 homework problems per week. They were each an individual assignment within Canvas, which kind of gets a little hairy to manage among a team of 3 graders. So we had a lot of spreadsheets to coordinate this project. The free textbook actually gives the students the numerical solution at the end, but not the steps throughout. So they have a little bit of a guide of if they are far off. Each homework problem was worth 3 points. If you turn it in by the early deadline, which is what you would consider a traditional deadline, you get 3 points. Oh, and it's correct, you get 3 points. If it's incorrect, but it was on time, resubmit it and you can get up to 2, right? So the idea was you can do it until the end of the semester. You have 15 weeks to do this stuff and they're all available on day 1. I will get into how that played out in real life. So the point of the early bird deadlines was to give students a little bit of a feeling of this is what I need to be doing this week. They have something in their Canvas to-do list, keeping them on pace. So some outcomes, more than half of the students consistently turned in their homework by that early bird deadline because they realized I get 80 points for doing it on time. I need to keep doing it on time. And the students who consistently turned in their homework on time with that good faith effort to get it right, most of them got A's in the class. So homework is the bedrock of statics. It's practice, practice, practice. Most students did use the chance to resubmit at least one homework assignment, especially when we got into, after midterms, we got into higher level problems like trusses. They needed to resubmit those a few times. Only under 10%, a very, very small amount of students chose to not do any homework at all, because if you look at the total menu of points in the class, You could pass without doing most of your homework, but not entirely. Therefore, this is strongly correlated with not passing the class. And one thing that the graders were nervous about was, what are we going to do if everybody waits until the end and turns in 80 homework problems on May 10th? And only 2 students did that. So we were very lucky that they were proactive with keeping up with their assignments. And I would say the majority of students didn't let an outstanding homework assignment linger for too long. They wanted to get it done and get it cleared out of their queue so that they could go forward. I will take a break and stop sharing my screen.
Great, thank you very much. And I just want to remind everybody, please ask some questions in the Q&A, and we will come back around and ask our panelists about those. Next up is Gloria Ramos from Citrus College. Gloria, are you ready? Perfect. Unmute, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gloria Ramos. You can reach me at that email address. And Citrus College is a 2-year community college about 10 miles east of Pasadena, California. It's a Hispanic serving institution. And I'm talking about my 2nd and 3rd semester calculus-based physics course, which is a 5-unit course. Depending on which semester it is, I get about 50 to 65 students. And what I look for is evidence for both content standards and what I call kind of scientific best practices standards or outcomes. So I have assignments that are aligned with the outcomes or skills that they build in order to show mastery of an outcome. And there's usually about 2 or 3 assignments per outcome. Some of those assignments are formative and auto-graded. This semester I used My Open Math, and I think I might continue to use that. And that's auto-graded, and students just have to have a certain average by the end of the semester. For those assignments, they can resubmit them. I think I gave them 4 tries this semester. To complete those assignments with at least 80% or higher. And then there are also some more summative assignments, and I grade those manually. Those tend to have more challenging questions, and those are graded on a complete or incomplete basis. Complete means it's generally correct. There might be maybe some minor errors, but they're getting to what I want them to. So if they score complete, that's fine. If they get an incomplete, they have abilities to resubmit those assignments using tokens, which I'll talk about on the next slide. And then students can use either pieces of their formative assignments or the summative assignments to create a VoiceThread portfolio. So VoiceThread is a tool where students can upload pictures or slides, and they do audio commentary over those slides, kind of explaining their work. And I use that to replace tests because there was way too much cheating in the fall, and I decided I just didn't want to do tests anymore. And so for the VoiceThread portfolio, it's the same type of thing. If the portfolio was kind of complete, incomplete, they had to address each of the outcomes, the content outcomes in the portfolio. And if they didn't, or if they didn't show enough evidence, it would get kicked back to them so that they could resubmit it. And for my scientific best practices outcomes, those are constantly assessed. Some of them, things like using scientific argumentation, I use the most recent score based on the assumption that as the semester goes through, they should be improving on that as they get more practice doing that. And others are assignment specific, so it might be things related to, for example, writing a lab report. So those there's a similar to the other ones, there's a series of assignments. So it might be, right, the method section of a lab report might be one assignment, and they have the ability to resubmit that if it doesn't meet that satisfactory level of what that lab section should be. So I use a token system for two primary reasons. One is for resubmissions and the other one is for late submissions. So students who put a good faith effort for their first submission, they can resubmit for free. That means they don't need to use a token, right? They made an effort, they get feedback from me, they have a chance to resubmit it without using a token. If they submit it again and it's still not quite where it needs to be, or they're not showing me enough evidence, then they would have to use a token to submit that particular assignment again. And if a student didn't submit the assignment by the unit deadline, or if they really made no good faith effort, like they wrote an equation maybe and not much else, which is not what I'm looking for, then they can resubmit, but they didn't make much of an effort, so that would cost them a token. And for the early bird deadline is what you might call, as was said, kind of a traditional deadline. So about every week they had a couple of assignments due. At the end of the unit, so there's a bunch of different topics that make up the unit. So at the end of the unit, in between the early bird deadline and the end of the unit, they can submit things late using a token, but after the unit deadline, then they have to contact me, and most students are pretty good about the early bird deadline or the unit deadline. And it's really meant to be I can't submit it today because, I got stuck at work, which happens with my students, or, they got a really big, life is happening. So it's okay for them to submit things a little late, but I don't want them to fall behind. So if they get to the end of the unit and they haven't submitted a lot of things, that means something is going on, and I would want to talk to them and see what's going on. When we get back to campus, I really like the portfolio, but this whole time I've been rethinking how I do assessments. So I think I might move away a little bit from the token system as far as resubmissions go, and just leave it as a kind of standard. You get this many attempts, and for more than that might require an office hour with me to kind of talk about what's going on. And for their portfolio, I don't necessarily just want evidence from their assignments, but I want to see more habits of minds type of thing. So again, for reassessments, I see that even though I say office hours, I do plan to continue having kind of online office hours for some of these reassessments. So that's what I've been doing.
Great, thank you. Gloria, there's a pretty direct question I think you could answer. Were students able to earn tokens in any way?
I've done that in the past when we were still on campus, where they could, we would have some guest speakers come to campus on, gravitational waves or something interesting like that. Or if they went to certain, we have kind of workshops for students on time management and things like that. But honestly, I felt that was not helpful for students. A lot of my students do work, or, they have 2 jobs, or they have to take care of their siblings or their kids. And I felt it was kind of unfair to have that opportunity for some students and not for other students. So I just give them a buttload of tokens at the beginning of the semester. It's unlikely that they're going to run out. And I give, and so the auto graded stuff that's done through my open math, so I can give them a bunch of late passes, and that is done kind of automatically. And I how many do I give them? I gave them about I think I gave them, it would probably average out to like 1.5 per assignment. So, and I tell them that this is not a put it off to the end of the semester, because you're not going to understand stuff at the end of the semester if you wait till the end of the semester. So it's really meant to be I just need a little extra time because life happened token. I don't know a better way to call it, or a better thing to call it. But that's really what it's meant for.
Great, thank you.
And if they run out, I offer them some more. It's fine with me.
I have sometimes offered students a sort of single purpose token. I call them a grace day. It automatically delays a deadline by 1 class day. And this last semester, I gave students a number of grace days equal to the number of assignments. And it was like, I even told them, so you can delay all of the assignments. And it was amazing how long it took some of them to like believe that. So, excuse me. So our next, our next speaker is Jackie Reish. Jackie, thank you. There you go.
There we go. Hopefully that's working. Hi, so I'm Jackie Reish. I am at Marymount University, which is in Arlington, Virginia. It's for the most part a liberal arts college, at least undergrad wise. We do have some grad programs, which gets the university part. But we have small classes. There we go. Okay. So the class that I have been doing mastery-based grading with is calculus with pre-calculus. So it's a 2-semester course that combines pre-calculus and calculus 1. So after the 2 semesters, it's equivalent to the students completing calculus 1. So I do my initial assessment through weekly quizzes, and I call my things they need to learn skills. So each skill appears on 3 quizzes, and to master a skill, they need to get its problem correct on 2 quizzes. So they get 3 chances to get it right twice. And then once the skill drops off the quizzes, then they can do retakes. And this picture is just a little example of some skills that from the first half of this class. So for the reassessment, I call it for the retakes. I found it easiest to create a bank of retake problems in just a LaTeX document. I know there's people that get like really fancy with this. I just have all the different questions for the different skills, and I have everything uncommented, and then everything commented out, and then I can just uncomment the things students need to retake. So if a student comes in and they say I need to retake skill 5, 7, and 8, then I can just uncomment 1 question for each of those and typeset it and print it out. This is something that I added to the first time I taught the class, the first time I was doing this, and then I really worked on building this up as I went. And then in subsequent years, as I've done it 3 years now, I can add to it. But the biggest buildup was as I went through it the first time. So students can come to office hours for retakes, but they can also, something I tried later, which worked really well, is I would give a survey in Canvas. The night before we had a quizzing class, and students could request retakes that they would complete after our quiz. There's usually always students would have some extra time. So this gave a nice way of students to be able to do retakes in class time and not have to come to my office, because we do have a lot of commuters, a lot of students that work. So that's what I did when we were in person. When we switched to online, I basically transferred all of those questions I had made in LaTeX into banks of questions in Canvas. So for each skill, I would have a bank of questions for it. And then I created quizzes for retakes that students could take at any time. So like, for example, I have retake skills 1 and 2. So it would randomly select one question from the skill 1 bank and one question from the skill 2 bank. And then students I'd have them just write on their own paper and email me a picture of their work, and then I could grade it on my iPad. I did have due dates for these to get it on their calendars, but I did accept students working on retakes after the due date. But I also like the way I have it. I divided it up into like smaller pieces because I do limit like how many skills a student can take at a time to avoid the case of somebody trying to do like 20 skills at once. So yeah, that's that, I think.
Great, thank you. So thank you to all of our panelists. We've got a few questions that I think all of you could address. And so I'm going to throw these open to the panel. And I think the biggest one here, one that is a very big one from a student point of view. So Francesca asks, the fact that a student can reassess a learning target later can cause a lot of procrastination with her students, and I have certainly seen this myself. How can you incentivize early reassessment without penalizing later reassessment? Anyone willing to take that one?
I can, sorry, I'm like looking at chat and getting distracted. So I do limit how many skills a student can take at a time. I think I do like up to 5 is I think in my syllabus I say like 3 or 4, but then I wind up like letting them do up to 5 skills at a go. So that's one way that they need to sort of work on this. That's to avoid the student that comes in at the end of the semester and it's like, I need to retake 20 skills. It's just not like, they're not going to do well on them. It's just not going to happen. So I limit how many skills they can do each day to get them to work on these as we go. But I also found just doing those surveys of getting people to, hey, what do you want to retake after the quiz? That would put it on their radar. And then they say, oh yeah, I need to retake these skills. And I could just get that going. And also when I did it in Canvas for when we were online hybrid, having it show up as an assignment, be on their calendar. I think that helped. I usually will have like maybe one student that's like the last week and they're like trying to retake a bunch of stuff. But for the most part, and constant reminders that we can retake things has helped.
I think that's an example of something I've mentioned a few times where students aren't really familiar with the incentives in a mastery grading system. And one of those is reassessing and sort of how they should be handling that. Like they're just not used to that. Would anyone else have ways of encouraging sort of punctuality in reassessing?
I can talk
Kim,
about
yeah.
that. So my homework assignments were the only ones that were reassessed in the course. And the way it was set up was they could get an extra point if they did it by my recommended deadline. So they weren't punished for waiting longer, right? So it's a carrot instead of a stick. That's one way I've seen it done.
And I see that in the chat, Francesca has mentioned the casual, by the way, what are you reassessing tomorrow, right? Just ask casually to a student who you know needs to think about that. There's a lot of social pressure that can happen there.
Yeah, and if I can just add real quick. So when we were still face-to-face, I would require my students to meet with me after kind of major unit tests. So we could go over, hey, these are the outcomes you have now. These are the ones you still need to reassess before the end of the semester. And just having that one-on-one conversation with my students, it really helped them realize, oh wait, I'm this close to this grade if I reassess this outcome. That was a super important conversation to have with my students. So encouraging them to do some of these reassessments early so that they can solidify a higher grade in the course, or to prepare them for that unit exam or test or portfolio or whatever major assignment is coming up.
And this actually brings in another question very nicely. So Gloria, what you were describing works well for those who use what I guess I would call permanent mastery. So once you have demonstrated mastery a certain amount, you're done, right? You've achieved that. Edward asks sort of a technical question for each of you, but I think this is very important to think about. Is it newest or best or some sort of something else, some other combination? And what is your thinking behind that?
So on my end, it's always been best. It's always like if they get it at some point, they get it, and that's good. My way of sort of dealing with the retention sort of thing, or what I want them to know by the end of the class, is by having some sort of also threshold on like a final exam, where like, yes, I'm for each objective on its own. Once you master it once, you're good. But there's also some like lower, like a 50 or 60% threshold on the final exam that you must get in terms of numbers of objectives that are mastered on the final exam to guarantee that you still know at least some of the or enough of the material by the end of the semester to be okay. You can pick which questions you want, and if you're at the top of the class, you're picking the easiest questions on the final, which I'm cool with. That's fine. But you're going through and you're showing me that at least by the final exam, you still know a certain amount of the course content.
Any others? Do any of our panelists use most recent? I know in our previous panel we had someone who did recency. So Gloria.
I only use that for more kind of habits of mind type of outcomes. So are they using scientific argumentation, for example? Because that is something that's a skill that they should have been hopefully gradually learning throughout the semester, or a very specific skill like writing a certain part of a lab report. I think I mentioned that one earlier. So for those types of things, I use the most recent, only because that's assessed very, very often, like throughout the whole semester, as opposed to the assignments, which are, or some of the course content, which is only a couple times in the semester.
And I think that's a really important thing for everyone to think about, right? Is that you get sort of different things you're assessing might respond to different types of reassessments or different types of permanency or not. And that you are free to choose those even differently within the same class, although that adds a little complexity to things.
So I mean, they have to get each skill right 2 times, but it like just 2 times at some point. But one thing that works nicely with that is that because the skills appear on 3 quizzes, if a student gets it right on the first 2, they can skip that skill on the 3rd quiz. So that gives some students, like they usually can skip some skills, and that saves me a little bit of grading. I always like, remember, you can skip some skills. I still will have students that still take the entire quiz no matter what, but it saves a little bit, and it's a nice little thing for them to be able to skip part of it.
That's another example of those weird little incentives that students are not quite used to, right? Yes, you don't have to do this. And I would say also
so many times going into the final being like, yes, if you've got it, you can skip it. Like the going to the extended midterms, the midterms got longer. It's like, yes, this midterm is 15 questions, but you can skip anything you got right in the first one. Just don't think about it. Write it down, know in advance, I can skip this problem, and then skip it. Please skip it. Don't do it again. I think I had very few students who actually did problems that already like mastered on previous exams because they said it so many times. But it's that idea that takes them a while for it to sink in that yes, skipping questions is not bad on these exams if it's done appropriately.
And for those who require, demonstrations of their understanding more than once, like Jackie was just saying, that is a way of showing some retention, at least within a certain time span. And you have some control over what that time span is. I find that very valuable, or perhaps demonstrations on different types of assignments or something like that. So we have several questions from Tural and Tyler, very similar ones here, essentially asking, how do you deal with reassessments when topics come near or at the end of the semester, right? So if something is in the last week or the last month, students have fewer opportunities. How do you manage that?
So I will generally have 2 or 3 skills that only appear on the last 2 quizzes or the very last quiz. And I make them just a one and done. So they just need to get it right once. And I also let them like do retakes throughout finals week. Like that's their ultimate deadline. You have through finals week to do any retakes you need to do.
Yeah, this is something that I am trying to figure out what to do in the future because so I had like a set of core competency objectives where if you have to pass all these to get a C in the course, basically, and some of them came after the last midterm. And so that was I'm like, okay, I'm not really okay with how this is set up. I'm a little worried about this, so I waited to see what happens. Basically, I ended up taking a progressing score to count as mastery on those objectives, particularly so that students wouldn't like fail or get a D in the course because they just didn't get this one problem completely right, where they only saw it on one quiz and the final. So I ended up doing that sort of as a reactionary measure to like seeing how things shooken out. But I'm still trying to figure out what the best way to sort of set that up is in the system that's based on these exams where they see all the objectives over and over again.
What I have done before was to take your 15 weeks and compress it to 14, and then you leave that dead week for reassessment for the students who need it. And what happens is that the students who don't need it love it because they feel like they got done early.
This sort of issue brings up my absolute favorite story ever from using standards-based grading. The very first time I used it, I fell into this very trap of having things that needed to be done twice that became late in the semester. And so my students literally begged me to add another quiz during the short Thanksgiving holiday week. Could we please have another quiz? Has that ever happened to anybody? I mean, that's an unusual situation. It wasn't good that we were in that situation, but it's a weird incentive.
I had students ask me for a fourth midterm. I was like, this is ridiculous. Like when what kind of class are students asking for midterm? But like, it's at that point that I realized it's clicking and they are realizing that midterms means more opportunities to show mastery. And so that was like, okay, a good chunk of the class is now getting it. They're understanding what the point is of this because they've now seen, like they asked for quizzes during the weeks of exams because again, quiz equals another chance to show mastery. And so like those small things where it's like, okay, some of my students are getting what I'm trying to get at with the system here.
So we have a question which is a very big picture philosophical one here. Some of us use reassessments or a revision essentially of existing work. Some use new attempts, right? Or attempt a new problem on the same objective. How do you decide which one to do and why?
Well, mine was manually hand graded, so it was the same thing again. Go back and fix it, which is why it was less points than if you got it completely right the first time. What I would caution with that is that it can just lead to students saying, I'm going to forgo the early bonus and just copy from my friend who knows they got it right. So that is something to, if you're doing graded homework, to watch out for that. If I were doing weekly quizzes, like some of the other panelists have done, I would create unique problems each time.
There was a quote from the Build a Syllabus workshop earlier today that was a conceptual problem the second time around becomes a mechanical problem or something like that, right? That a revision on something can turn it into a different type of problem. Does anybody else have in the past perhaps used revisions or changed how you do that for any particular reason?
I've done like revisions with proof classes where, students are writing proofs, they can do revisions on their proofs. And that feels like something like with calculus, like the questions are just, it's just, they get a new question that's similar to do. But I feel like with the higher up classes, like revisions might be more appropriate, especially if they're doing proofs or projects or something.
Yeah, I had that for a proofs-based course where I was doing this with quizzes, and they would revise and sort of resubmit to me their answer to the previous one, and then I would give them, and like that was their sort of reflection before I'd give them their new attempt. So I sort of had it as a two-part thing where like we're doing simple proofs. So it was like, a proof by induction. It's like, okay, well, so write the proof correctly, and I'll give you a different problem that's similar but related for them to attempt. So it was sort of like the reflection process was a revision to allow them to access this new attempt.
And yeah, so mentioning that idea, a reflective process of some sort can help with whatever type of revisions you're doing. I think, Gloria, you had mentioned a bit of that and this is something I've used in my own setups, is that some sort of intentional reflection, usually heavily scaffolded, can help students both identify what they need to work on and also ensure that they have put in the thought in that. I know a number of people use cover sheets, essentially, add on a cover sheet describing what you changed and why, or what your misunderstanding was and why.
And some folks won't accept the resubmission unless that reflection piece is there.
And is satisfactory.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, here again is a question that can be kind of broadly philosophical. So suppose that a student uses up all of their reassessments, or maybe you allow unlimited ones and they just keep spinning on the same thing, right? They're not making progress on these reassessments. What do you do with them? And do you find that that's a distraction from things they should be paying attention to? And how do you manage that? So maybe another way to put this would be, is there a point where you say to a student, perhaps you should stop doing this and you should move on to something else?
For me, it depends on what it is, because if it's a core idea that they're going to need to continue on the rest of the semester, I can't let them quit on that. And so I'll want to talk to them, have them come into my office hours, so that, because sometimes it's just students don't understand one small thing and they don't know what they don't know, so they don't know what to ask, right? So if they come to my office and we talk about that particular topic, then I can kind of diagnose, hopefully, what they're missing, why they can't get that outcome. But it also depends on when it is in the semester, right? If it's late in the semester and they only have to master so many outcomes to get a certain grade, and it's possible that that one outcome won't change their grade, and it may not be a core big idea that they necessarily need to walk away with, then I might say, you don't need this. You have a pretty solid B right now. If you want that A, we need to work on this. And I'm happy to do that with them. But sometimes even if they get that, they might have other ways to get that B that's not necessarily that one outcome.
That again sort of falls into the understanding the incentives and the structure well enough, and helping the student navigate that. So I'd like to finish on another sort of broad question from Joe, which is, I'm going to rephrase this slightly. So let's say you're doing this for the first time. You're not quite confident in your list of objectives or the amount or the timeline involved in them. Is there something you can do to give yourself flexibility? If you perhaps can't reach all of these objectives, or if you discover some critical problem in the middle?
I mean, I would say my big comment on this front is just transparency with the students. Like I had this sort of thing come up with the whole, like, there were some objectives coming really late in the semester, and how is it going to be assessed? How many were they going to show up? And the fact that, like, there was a set of one objective that was on like the second to last day of class, and there wasn't a quiz after it. And so like they were going to see the problem for the first time on the final. I was like, okay, I know this is coming along in the final. This is going to be a very easy, straightforward problem of this topic. So it's not going to be anything super complicated, and just being transparent with like what you're adjusting and how you're changing things. It can be hard to sort of tweak objectives on the fly, just because that messes a lot of different levers in the course, depending on how your grading system is set up. But just being able to be transparent and just say, hey, I'm working with this. I didn't quite get here, so I'm going to make this problem simpler. I'm going to make this one easier. I'm going to shorten the length of these problems, just because I know it's a burden. It's going to be sort of too much to work with, that kind of a thing.
Any other last bits of advice to people who are new to this? So I do. Oh, please go.
I was just going to quickly say the same advice I give to my students. Productive failure is not a bad thing. So try it, and you'll learn from that and do better next time.
And I do want to say the issue of reassessments is one of those knives edges in mastery grading, where by falling to one side or the other can make a huge difference, not just for your students, but for you in terms of workload. even a fairly limited reassessment policy in your first go round can have huge payoffs. So do be careful, be fairly conservative initially, and then think about how you can revise, right? All right, thank you again to all of our panelists. I am going to do a really quick screen share with next steps, and then we'll have a quick break. All right, so we are at the end of the reassessments panel. And again, thank you very much for being here, all of our panelists and everyone who's attended and asked so many very useful questions. We're taking a brief 15-minute break until 4:30 p.m. Eastern. And then please hop on the very last link for a town hall question and answer session based on your questions submitted earlier. And we will see you then. And I will stop our recording.